governments for decisions, which means that the corporations don't have as much money as they would have if they made the law instead of governments making the law. That's the first thing it does. It harmonizes regulation. Harmonizing regulation means a race to the bottom. You end up with the regulations they have in Mississippi. And it stops governments from bringing in new national regulations. This affects, obviously, our trade union rights, it affects our human rights, it affects our privacy rights, and so on, but it's absolutely crucial with the environment, because everything we do that we are able to do with the environment is a matter in one way or another of getting regulations to protect the environment. Now, when we say that the corporations will be able to do this, we need to know this. It's important to know the scale on which this is already happening. There were 58 claims by corporations against governments to offshore tribunals of this kind, 58 claims in 2012. There are currently 514 outstanding claims, which shows you, among other things, that the corporations wrap the governments up for on average 10 years with these claims to stop us doing anything to protect ourselves. More than 1 in 3 of those claims involve the oil industry, mining, or the gas industry. This is central to climate change. Central to climate change, again, is the power of the largest corporations. If you go and look at the Forbes list of the great global corporations, the 10 largest corporations in the world by sales last year were 6 oil companies, 2 car companies, Walmart, which is a giant parking lot, and the Chinese National Grid. These are 10 corporations that will be ended if we start to move to do anything about climate change. And they are the 10 most powerful corporations in the world. It's very important to understand that it's not just a matter of American corporations. Lone Pine, which is suing from America, from Delaware, is suing the Quebec government. Lone Pine is a Canadian corporation with a subsidiary in Delaware in the United States. If you want to look at why the EU is supporting this so strongly, they're not supporting it because British business wishes to go under to American business. They're supporting it because it gives British and European business the same thing it gives the opportunity to get round what the British and European people want, the same as it gives American business the opportunity to get round what American people want. So we're up again, and why this matters to climate change is because of what we will have to do in order to stop climate change. There is, for anybody who's thought about it at any length, it's pretty clear what we have to do. And sooner or later, we will do it. Whether we do it after we have 200 million dead or 300 million dead or 800 million dead, I don't, or whether we'll do it before we hit the horror, I don't know. But sooner or later, we're going to have to do these things. The first thing is to leave, I would go further than the International Energy Agency, I'd say about 3/4 or 80% of the known fossil fuel reserves in the ground. So leave most of the fuel in the ground. That's why fracking is so insulting, because they're adding reserves every time they do a fracking well. They make it clear that they're going to take the whole of the reserves and then they're going to take the extreme energy. So we have to leave that in the ground. We have to have a massive government investment in very large numbers of jobs to cover the world with renewable energy instead of fossil fuels, to insulate and renovate all of the buildings of all kinds so that they use much less energy, and a massive move to public transport run on renewable electricity. So we're going to have all of those things, however it comes out, and we're going to have massive regulation. Regulation of refrigerators, regulation of light bulbs, regulation of automobiles, regulation of how you build houses, regulation of this and that and the other thing and the other thing and the other thing, just so that we're saying again and again we're going to use as little energy as possible, and we're going to use renewable energy whenever we can. This is what any government sooner or later will have to do. I'm campaigning against climate change. We've got an alliance with the unions that has a a booklet and so on where we're campaigning for 1 million climate jobs in the UK now, so we can do something about climate change and take the people we know who need jobs off the dole. We want it done now, but sooner or later this is what is going to have to be done. Okay, in this situation, to do those things is to break through everything that the EU-US trade deal will stand for. It's to break through the corporate control, break through the dumbing down of regulation, the bonfire of regulations, because that kind of stuff will stop us from having really serious controls on car mileage. It will stop us from, at the moment, the EU does not accept oil from the tar sands. It says it's produced in too wasteful a way. We will be forced to accept oil from the tar sands. It will force us, whether or not we want to accept palm oil in very large amounts. And the production of palm oil is destroying great rainforests that are essential for stopping climate change, for absorbing carbon. It will force us to absorb the ethanol from corn and soya, mainly corn, maize, in the United States, which again is an enormous actual consumer of, not consumer, an enormous emitter of CO2. It will stop us if we're going to run a proper, all over the world, if we're going to run wind power, if we're going to run solar power, if we're going to run wave power, tidal power, all of these things, we're going to have to share the knowledge all across the world. And intellectual property rights will stop us from doing that, but also we're going to have to do this. We're going to have to renationalize the railways in this country. There's no question at all. We're going to have to renationalize the electrical power system. We're going to have to renationalize the grid. Again, it will stop us from doing this because that will not be good for the companies. That will not be good for the corporations. So, and God knows, public transport. If we say you can't run cars on the main streets because we're going to have, you know, we're going to clear it so the buses go fast and so the children can play in the side streets and so on. All of that, this is against. So it will make, if it looks like it will make what we want to do to stop climate change impossible to do. And that indeed is their hope. The people who run the fracking in particular right at the moment is the single most important thing to them. The scale of fracking, it's worth saying again, there are 482,000 active gas wells in the United States, most of them produced by fracking. The plans are to have between 2,000 and 3,000 new gas wells a year in this country with fracking. We are building towards, say, 90,000 or 100,000 wells. We are talking about a massive project. Okay, now, they want to pass this so they can stop us doing what we want to do. And I think we have to remember that this is not a fight that stops when they pass the law. What we have to do is start by having, we've been here before with other things, we start by having the widest possible campaign against the deal. And it may be that that campaign will win. I wouldn't, lots of trade deals have collapsed. I wouldn't say this one's bound to go through. But we have the largest possible campaign that we can have, and crucially, two things. We get the word out as to what it means to the widest possible number of people, and we get the organizations, the institutions committed to being against it, not just the environmental ones and obviously all the unions, but the churches and so on, right across the society. We get it so that people know it's a bad thing, even if they don't know very much more, that already we know that it's a thing that's being done to us and in a totally undemocratic and secret way. But then, once it's passed, we're going to have to break it. This is very important because I've been doing work in different countries and with NGOs and with unions and so on about climate jobs. And you come up again, in both unions and NGOs, you come up against, it's not against, because it's a genuine question. People say, well, can we do that? Is it within the rules of the EU? Again and again people say that, and I say, each time I say, well, no, it's not okay with the rules of the EU, but we can break this rule of the EU because nobody is going to enforce it if we're trying to give 1 million people jobs and save the climate. Nobody is going to enforce it. But people are worried. Even when I say that, people are worried. If you pass, there's a thing about the law now. It runs deep and wide in this society, the idea that if something is illegal, you cannot defy it. It's very scary to defy it. The beauty of the fracking movement is all those people doing direct action out there defying the law every time and being acquitted and acquitted and acquitted and acquitted and acquitted because juries won't convict them and magistrates won't convict them and judges throw it out of court because they all know these are bad laws and what these people are doing is good. And we have to take that example and carry it forward. The one that I think is most important, 2 minutes to go, the one that's most important and I find most inspiring, I worked for many years in AIDS units in hospitals, back when we didn't have any drugs to treat people. And finally we got some drugs that work for most people, give them a reasonably long life. Those drugs were forbidden to people in all the poor countries in the world because they were too expensive. There were generic drugs, copies of those drugs which were cheap, which governments could afford, which they could get to their people. And the World Trade Organization and the government of the United States under Bill Clinton and Al Gore forbade those drugs to be given to anybody. In South Africa, the people with HIV, and there were an awful lot of people with HIV in South Africa, the people with HIV organized to defy that law, organized to import the drugs illegally, and the South African government was told by Bill Clinton they had to fight against the people with HIV. They had to defend the big pharma. And so that government of South Africa did so. But in response to the mass movement that there was in the streets of people in South Africa, in response to that movement, suddenly there were large groups of very angry gay men in the United States pursuing Al Gore everywhere he went. He was running for president. And every time he tried to have a photo opportunity, there were gay men who had been through the epidemic, who felt with themselves, with people they loved, who felt a deep solidarity with what was happening to people in South Africa, who made it impossible for Al Gore to campaign at all. And lo and behold, Al Gore got Bill Clinton to change the policy. And they told the South African government it was all right to do it now, and the South African government did it. And we destroyed, the movement as a whole destroyed, intellectual property rules in pharmaceuticals. We can do that again. And once we've done it, I mean, Bill Clinton is now going everywhere promoting generic drugs. He's got a massive foundation to do it and so on. Once you win, you win. So I think in fighting over this, we have to fight. We have to get the word out now, lobby, do everything we can now. Because what they want to do to us is terrible for the planet and for every living thing on the planet. But if and when they pass it, we do not give up. That is the point at which we begin to fight. Thank you.